Before we begin configuring our SAML environment, just a few things to cover. Prerequisites. These include items that are required but either not really necessary to be discussed here, or due to time simply unable to include in this session to the detail required. You need a working virtual apps and desktops environment. A Citrix ADC installed with base configuration is licensed having a premium license file installed. A configured Citrix Gateway V server is configured, connected to my StoreFront, and in the current state simply using basic authentication via LDAP. For external and internal access to the ADC, split DNS entries need to be configured for the FQDN being used. Certificates for accessible FQDNs being used need to be installed for CRL check-in and securing client to ADC connectivity. Of course, an Azure tenant is required and synced if joined to on-premise domain servers. This needs to be licensed also to allow for enhanced security features such as MFA. And for the MFA process, you need a suitable authenticator app installed to a mobile device and configured for your account usage. Finally, to give a true single sign-on experience when using SAML, because the identity provider in its communication to the service provider does not reveal the user's password information, when you try to access a resource from the StoreFront, you will then need to enter your authentication details to access it. Using a Citrix Federated Authentication service gets around this issue using smart card certificates from a Microsoft Certificate Authority, which we are using in this demo setup, but is optional. And from what you see in the upcoming configuration steps, will work for SAML authentication to access your StoreFront. You'll just need to sign in again when then accessing any resource. So what are we going to cover in the demo? We're going to set up a Citrix ADC SAML connector for on-premise Citrix deployments in Azure AD. We will then install the identity provider certificate into the Citrix ADC to authenticate communication between the SP and IDP. We're doing it like this because if we try to install the IDP certificate when configuring the SAML virtual server, it asks us for a key file which we don't have access to. Next, we will configure a SAML virtual server and use the App Federation metadata role copied from the Citrix ADC SAML connector for Azure AD application. We're going to configure an nFactor authentication policy because if you bind the SAML authentication policy directly to the gateway virtual server, apparently this is considered deprecated and will be removed. So we configure an nFactor policy that is just an authentication virtual server with authentication profile. We configure StoreFront for the Citrix ADC gateway and SAML authentication. Then we can test the setup using a Tenzig 6048QC0 client and finish with some troubleshooting pointers. To integrate the Citrix ADC gateway with the Azure SAML identity provider, you must configure the identity provider application first with service provider information. I'm going to launch my Azure Portal Admin application from the Start menu. Once loaded, I need to select Enterprise Applications in the Services section. If you can't find Enterprise Applications in your list of commonly used services, then go to the search bar and start typing Enterprise and you'll soon see it in the list. If I click it, then I'm presented with a list of managed applications inside the Azure AD. If we do a search for Citrix, then no listed applications appear for the Citrix ADC SAML connector for Azure AD that we need for this setup. To set up a new application, we click the New Application symbol at the top of the screen. Once this is loaded, you see a list of popular platforms and applications to choose from. A quick way to find the specific app you're looking for is once again to start typing the name of it inside the search box. So let's type Citrix again. Let's click Citrix ADC SAML connector for Azure AD and you'll see a new window appear that gives us the opportunity to change its name. I'll leave the standard default name as is and then tag on the words Tenzig Demo. Once I'm happy, I click Create and you can see the status message displayed indicating that the application is being created. After a short while, we are then presented with an overview of the new application. Notice that you can see the name and any unique application and object IDs that were generated during the creation process. In the Getting Started section below, we have several options open to us. First, we have Assign Users and Groups, and this is where we assign any AAD users and groups that will be allowed to use this application. Second, we have Set Up Single Sign-On, and this is where we set up and create a connection between our identity provider AAD and Citrix ADC Gateway. We'll come back to this in just a moment. Let's go back to option 1 Click on the Assign Users and Groups link inside the box, and then click the Add User Group link in the top left. For the demo, I'm just going to select my own user, so I just simply start typing my name. And then select it from the list. Once I am happy, I click the Select button in the bottom right of the screen, and then the Assign button. Now that I've assigned a user, you'll see me in the list. If I click the Overview link in the top left, it will take me back to Getting Started. And if I click Get Started inside the Setup Single Sign-On box, we're taken into the Single Sign-On option screen, where we can see three further options: Disabled, SAML, and Linked. But for this demonstration, we want to use AAD, so we'll click the SAML button. Once inside the Single Sign-On screen, we need to complete section 1 first. This is where we tell the Azure IDP all about our service provider and where the request will be coming from. If I click on the Edit icon, top right of box 1, then I can complete the section fields that are required below. I just need to fill in the identifier, reply, and sign-on URLs, and we should be good then to move on. To start, we need to click the Add Identifier. So for this item, you normally have to enter your external Citrix ADC gateway's fully qualified domain name. Once we've completed the identifier URL, then we just simply move down and click Add Reply URL. This time we can take the identifier entered above by using Ctrl+C and then paste it into the Reply URL field using Ctrl+V. Finally, we append the value /CGI/SAML auth. We're going to add a sign-on URL. Click into the sign-on URL field and simply use the external Citrix ADC server's fully qualified domain name again. But this time round, we're going to append the value /Citrix auth service /auth service.asmx. So I click on the Save button, and you should then see a success message displayed. Let's close this box and see what has changed in the Setup section. We're now being asked if we want to test the single sign-on with Citrix ADC SAML connector. I may as well just say no, I'll test later for now. So now we can see the identifier, reply, and sign-on URLs we have just configured on the overview screen. For now, we don't need to worry about section 2, attributes and claims. Next, we need to create a certificate that will be used between the Citrix ADC gateway and the Azure IDP for securing the communication. So underneath section 3, SAML signing certificate, I click on Add a certificate, and then at the top, just click on the button New Certificate. Now, further down, we've also got notification email addresses. So I already have an entry populated, but if you didn't have one, then you can enter your own email address here. Now that has been successful, I close the SAML signing certificate screen, say no, I'll test later. Now the certificate has been saved, we need to go back into Edit, and you can see now that the status is set to inactive. So we have to click on the three dots and then make the certificate active. Activating your certificate, we say yes, and then that has been successfully activated. So we can now close that screen, and now we see more details about the SAML signing certificate. So again, I'll say no, I'll test later. And here we've got our App Federation metadata URL. This we will use later on the Citrix ADC gateway when configuring the SAML server. The metadata URL can be used to automatically retrieve information about your IDP to the Citrix gateway. For now, from here, what we need to do is download the IDP certificate. We can download it in different formats if we wish, and also we can download the Federation metadata XML also. But because we're using Citrix ADC 13.1, this isn't required because we can just import the information using this URL here. So I'll just download by clicking the blue download button. We've got a name here, so I'm just going to save it to my desktop. And then there is one last thing we need to do here to set up an additional layer of security by adding multi-factor authentication into the mix. So I can either create my own conditional access profile and add my app to it, or I can just piggyback off an already tried and tested profile by adding my Citrix ADC SAML connector for Azure AD app to that profile instead. For the demo, I'm going to show you how to add your own service provider app to an existing conditional access profile. So from the search bar, I'm going to search for conditional, and now Azure AD conditional access appears. So I just click on that entry, and here we can see our existing policies. So let's go into this first policy here, and here we can see the details for the conditional access policy. So for our purposes, we're going to go to Cloud Apps or Actions and click on 3 apps included to be able to add our Citrix ADC SAML connector for Azure AD app. And then where it says select, I'm just going to click on this link here and then search for our Citrix SAML connector. So I just put a tick next to the entry and I'm happy with that, so I just press select. And now that application has also been added to this conditional access policy. I just click on save, and now we're ready to set up our Citrix ADC gateway as our service provider. To begin my setup, I'm first going to sign into my Citrix ADC through a web browser window. From the menu down the left hand side, I'm going to go to Traffic Management, SSL, Certificates, and then use the option CA Certificates. I'm going to click on the Install button, give my certificate key pair name, which I will use as Azure AD Cert, and then click the Choose File button and browse to the location you downloaded the cert to from the Azure portal. When ready, click the blue Install button and the uploaded certificate will be then visible under the Unknown Certificates section. Okay, so next we go to Citrix Gateway, Policies, Authentication, and SAML. Switch to the tab labeled Servers and click the Add button. In the name field, give the SAML server a descriptive name. I will use Azure _IDP. Leave the option Import Metadata enabled, and in the SAML IDP metadata role, we're going to paste in the App Federation metadata role. So let's go back to the Azure Admin application. Underneath SAML signing certificate, we copy the App Federation metadata role, go back to the SAML server setup, and then paste it into the SAML IDP metadata role field. In the issuer name field, I enter the name that the SAML IDP is expecting from the service provider. Normally this is the FQDN of the Citrix ADC gateway. Azure AD calls this the identifier or entity ID and should be the same value. Now scroll down and click the Create button. Edit the SAML server again, uncheck the option Import Metadata to disable it, and you should then see that the fields imported are filled in for you. For the IDP certificate name, we're going to select the SAML IDP certificate that was exported from the Azure SAML IDP and imported to the Citrix ADC. The Citrix ADC will then use this IDP certificate to verify any SAML assertions from the IDP. From the drop-down list, we click on the down arrow, and then we select the Azure IDP certificate that we imported earlier to the Citrix ADC. The redirect URL is already configured from the import. The Citrix ADC gateway will redirect users to this URL. When finished, we can scroll down and click the OK button to save any changes. Do the following to create an Advanced Authentication Policy AAA virtual server and bind it to a gateway virtual server. First, go to Security, expand AAA Application Traffic, expand Policies, then expand Authentication, expand Advanced Policies, and then click Policy. At the top of the page, click the Add button, enter a name. I will use Azure _SAML, change the action type to SAML, then in the action, select the SAML server that we created in the previous step. In the expression field, enter true, and then press create. Then go to virtual servers, still under AAA application traffic. Click the add button, enter a name again, set the IP address type to non-addressable, and then press OK. You can optionally bind a server certificate here. It doesn't matter what certificate you choose, but if you don't bind the certificate, then the AAA virtual server will report as down, although will still work. I'm just going to click continue for now. Under Advanced Authentication Policies, go to No Authentication Policy and click where it says click to select under Select Policy. Click the small circle to the left of the Azure SAML policy that we created earlier. Then press the blue select button. I can then click the blue button labelled Bind at the bottom of the window. Click Continue. And then at the bottom of the page, click Done to finish creating the AAA virtual server. Now, go to Citrix Gateway and select Virtual Servers. Edit your existing Gateway virtual server. On the right-hand side of the screen, in the Advanced Settings column, click Authentication Profile. On the left side of the screen, find the Authentication Profile section and then click the button labelled Add. Enter a name. Again, I will use Azure _nFactor _SAML. And then where it says click to select under Authentication Virtual Server, I click the small circle to the left of the Authentication Virtual Server, and then press select. Then click the blue create button. Make sure you click the blue OK button before you click done. If you don't click OK, then your changes won't be saved. On the Citrix StoreFront server, go to Stores, select the store, then click Manage Authentication Methods. Make sure Pass-Through from Citrix Gateway is selected. Click the bottom gear icon on the right and click Configure Delegated Authentication. Make sure Fully Delegate Credential Validation to Citrix Gateway is enabled with a tick to the left, and then click OK twice. Go to Manage Citrix Gateways, and if none are listed, click Add. I have one already, so select the gateway and then click Edit. On the General Settings screen, we give the gateway a name and then set the Citrix Gateway of the FQDN used by our Citrix ADC. We have usage or role set to authentication and HDX routing. On the Secure Ticket Authority screen, ours is configured already to our DDC, but not if already done, configure your STA. Then go to Authentication Settings. On here, we enter a callback URL, which is required, otherwise the SAML authentication won't work. This is entered as the FQDN of our Citrix ADC. When ready, press OK when finished. Then press Close, and finally go to Configure Remote Access Settings, and ensure that your gateway is assigned to the store. Then press OK to finish. And that completes our SAML environment configuration. We just now need to test it works. I'm going to demonstrate the Azure SAML authentication process using one of our NOS-C 0 clients, which is 10-zig hardware running the NOS 64-bit operating system, our own 0 client firmware optimized specifically in this case to be run in Citrix environments only. I'm going to start off with a factory default device and go through the initial quick setup wizard to show the simple setup process. The first item the wizard asks us for is the country the device will be used. This is to set the regional information on the client, such as time zone and keyboard layout. In my case, I select Great Britain, UK. We next set the time and date. This is used to verify any certificates installed are valid and not expired. Lastly, we get to the Citrix workspace configuration. There are a lot of configurable items in this area, but as this firmware is optimized for Citrix environments, Commonly used items are by default pre-configured. If we were using Citrix Cloud Workspace, we could change the connection type field to Citrix Workspace Self-Service, but as we are connecting StoreFront through our Citrix ADC, we leave it for now as Citrix StoreFront Receiver for Web. In the server address field, I enter the URL used to access my Citrix ADC. With just these items configured and the correct certificates installed, the majority of Citrix environments using StoreFront Receiver for Web should be accessible. There are more configuration items you can look at setting up, such as setting it to run as a kiosk client, whereby when the device boots directly to the Citrix storefront automatically, so the user doesn't need to interact with the NOS-C OS. But that is out of this session's remit, and I will go over some links at the end of this presentation to videos on our YouTube channel that will cover this in greater detail. For now though, I press OK to close the Citrix Workspace application settings. If I try and connect now pressing the login button, then I am presented with just a white screen. This is because I have a certificate installed on the Citrix ADC for my server address provisioned by GoDaddy, but I don't have the CA certificate chain currently installed on my client. So we need to install an additional intermediate CA certificate, and this can be done locally on the client using a USB storage device. Alternatively, if I had a Tenzig Manager instance installed, I could use that to deploy certificates remotely to clients. To begin, we need to go into the control panel by clicking on the cog icon on the NOS-C desktop. As a security mechanism, by default, installation from local storage is prohibited, so we need to enable this to allow installation of the certificates from the USB storage. This can be done from the Security Settings applet under the Systems functions of the control panel. I click Security Settings, and towards the bottom, click the white box next to Enable Installation from USB Storage, so that a tick appears to allow installation of the certificates. I can then press OK to return to the control panel screen. And now if I attach a USB drive with the certificates installed on the root folder, a USB installer window appears. And as you can see here, the installer utility will still only allow you to install certain files, such as certificates, printer drivers, firmware updates, and images for customizing the client more to a customer's corporate imaging. Installing certificates is a two-part process. To begin with, from the certificates area of the USB installer, I make sure that gdig2.crt, which is the certificate I want to install, has a tick in the box to the right of the file name. And when happy with this, press the Install button. Once installed here, we can close the USB installer and then open the Certificates applet from the System functions of the control panel again. From this screen, I first go to Manage and then press the Import button. I select my USB storage device containing the certificate from the left-hand side, which is normally listed as SDA1. I then select gdig2.crt from the list of files presented and press the Open button at the bottom of the window. Finally, as I want this certificate to be used for authenticating websites, I set the trust level to trust this CA to identify websites by clicking the box to the left of the name so a tick appears, and then finish by pressing the OK button twice and then closing the certificate applet with the Close button. We would normally disable the option to enable installation from USB storage to secure the client fully again, but for now we will leave it as it is. And that's it now from the Tenzig NOS-C side, all done. And for easy deployment of further devices, we could generate a template based from the configuration on this device in the Tenzig Manager, and then use that to auto-configure additional clients, including the installed certificate, so that they can be used right away after being deployed. More videos on using Tenzig Manager are available on our YouTube channel. So all we need to do now is go back to the main login window and then click Login. Wait a few moments and our Azure IDP sign-in box appears with the Tenzig corporate imaging. I type in my Azure username with domain and click Next. Key in my password and press the Sign In button. Wait a few moments and then I should be presented with an MFA verification window. So remember earlier during configuration of the Citrix ADC SAML connector for Azure AD in the Azure portal that we added RSP to an already set up conditional access profile to make sure that MFA was a condition of sign-in. That's the reason that we now get to see this credentials window appear, just as an extra layer of security. So I'll use a verification code from my mobile app. I then go to my mobile phone and then navigate to my Microsoft Authenticator app, find my account details, and then enter the one-time password code presented. I then click on the Verify button, and at this prompt to stay signed in, I'm going to say no, and then my storefront will be displayed. Now that we have successfully signed on using Azure SAML Authentication, I can see my storefront and resources that are available to me, including any published apps and desktops. Now, as I touched on earlier when discussing the Citrix Federated Authentication service during the prerequisites, as SAML authentication does not obtain the password information for a user from the identity provider, when I wanted to open one of these resources, I would again be requested to enter my credentials to gain access. But because we have the Citrix Fast Server in place, this is giving me a transparent single sign-on experience, because in the background the storefront requests the Citrix Fast Server to use smart card certificates assigned to the users from a Microsoft Certificate Authority, and which are then stored on the Citrix Fast Server. So when a resource is accessed, as done here, the VDA requests the certificate from the Citrix Fast Server to authenticate and complete the Windows logon process. Accessing my personal W10 desktop, I am not requested to authenticate and log on automatically. Finally, I would just like to end this demo with some pointers on places to start looking if you do find yourself needing troubleshoot authentication issues through the ADC or with the Azure Citrix ADC SAML connector. First, let's take a look on the Azure portal. I'm going to run my Azure Portal admin application once again. On here, I go back to Enterprise Applications and enter Citrix in the search field. And both the Citrix ADC SAML connector for Azure AD and Citrix Cloud SAML SSO applications are displayed. Click Citrix ADC SAML connector for Azure AD to access the application overview screen. From the menu down the left-hand side, look for an option for sign-in logs. You may need to scroll down if it is not visible already. Click this item and you will be presented with a screen displaying a list of logon actions and whether the attempt was successful or failed, for example. Clicking one of these individual items brings up another window with further details. The basic info screen gives details of the login attempt, and if the status was failed, a failure reason and additional details are shown along with possible troubleshooting steps to take further. You can also see details on the user's location and device used to access. On the Authentication Details screen, if using MFA through conditional access policies, you can see if the first factor authentication has been met and then if the MFA requirement has also. Moving to the conditional access screen, you can then see which conditional access policy was applied to the sign-in attempt. Now let's take a look at troubleshooting from the ADC. We can gather further information using AAAD.debug from the Citrix ADC command line interface. That is useful for troubleshooting issues such as general authentication errors, username/password failures, authentication policy configuration errors, and group extraction discrepancies. To begin, we are going to connect to the Citrix ADC command line interface using a secure shell or SSH client, which in my case I will use PuTTY. I have this utility already downloaded and available on my desktop, so just double click the PuTTY icon to open the application. I enter the FQDN or IP address to my ADC and check that the connection type is set to SSH. If I want to look at this information that we're going to obtain now later on, I can also go to the login page, enable all session output underneath session login, and then enter a destination file name for where that information will be stored. Once then ready, we can press the open button to begin the connection. We're then requested for our authentication details. Once these are entered, the connection should be completed. So now we need to switch to the shell prompt. So to do that, you just enter the command shell, S-H-E-L-L. And then we need to switch to the TMP directory. So we enter the command cd /TMP. Finally, to initiate the debug, we enter the command cat /AAAD.debug and then press enter. This will then allow you to be able to view the debug contents, which is updated in real time. You can then perform the authentication process that requires troubleshooting and monitor the output of the debug command to interpret and troubleshoot the authentication process. With SAML, you should be able to see the authentication request and SAML response from the identity provider. When you are finished capturing any diagnostic information here, just press Ctrl+C to stop the process, and then close your SSH client.